About 71% of the world's surface is covered in water. Our next guest wants to make it the next frontier for mining. Gerard Barron is CEO and Executive Chairman of the Metals Company. Gerard, welcome back to Kitco.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Can you take us through some of the milestones at the Metals Company in 2023?
Well, maybe if I look back on the last 12 months, I mean, it's been a transformative period for us. As we've communicated to the market, we have identified 1.6 billion tons of these nodules that sit on two of our license areas. And those two licenses have been ranked the world's largest and the world's second largest undeveloped nickel deposits on the planet. So I don't think anyone had any fear about, did we have the resource? And of course, it's two-dimensional. These nodules lie on the ocean floor, so we don't have to drill and imagine what the structure looks like. We survey it. We take pictures of it, for the want of a word. And then, I guess two questions people always have, or maybe three, and one of them was, can you collect them at scale? And so last year, for 6 months, we were on our license area collecting nodules, and it was a success on all fronts. Of course, we had the hidden gem. We also had a second vessel, which was filled with 80 people, many of them scientists, and they were looking at the area before we touched it, during collection phase, and then stayed behind afterwards to survey what the impacts had been. And we drove about 80 plus kilometers on the seafloor. We harvested about 5,000 tons, and we brought home about 3,000 tons. And that was a really important trial for two reasons. One is the Hidden Gem is our first production vessel, so we wanted to test the system from end to end. And secondly, it was also an important part of our environmental permitting process, because understanding those impacts is an important part. And of course, there is a lot of speculation about impacts, mainly from the MGO world. But what we've always said is, let's gather the data and trust the data. And that's what we have now. We have, a growing volume of data that is forming the basis of our science program, and which will form part of our application. And so if I had to look back on the last 12 months, that would be the number one advantage, number one goal achieved. And of course, we made great progress on the two other things that people ask about, and that is the onshore processing. We identified a partner who can process our nodules with regards to existing infrastructure, so we don't have to go and build something new. We can just use existing infrastructure. And I can't think of too many mining projects in the world that can do that, using existing infrastructure without having to spend onshore capex. And then finally, of course, the permitting. And that's where I am now in Kingston, Jamaica, because we're making great progress on the mining code. So it's been a pretty transformative year. And in fact, I should mention one fourth thing, and that is financing. When our stock price was in the doldrums, we went to our existing shareholders. We put $30 million into Treasury, most of it coming from existing people back in August. And then recently, our biggest investor, Allseas, extended us a $25 million unsecured credit line just to allow us to keep moving while we, get to convey the value, the inherent value that we see in the resource and the project.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Let's just stick with operations before we kind of take a trip with you down to Jamaica and talk about what's going on with the ISA. So when you talk about bringing up commercial production, is it, I still like, when I look at it like a typical mine, for instance, if it's like an open pit, for instance, it's kind of a matter of either adding another truck or adding, building out additional circuits on the mill, for instance, as well, too. So maybe take us through, because I would imagine that there would be very different constraints that you would be dealing with in terms of actually kind of scaling out what you'd be doing.
Well, the production vessel, the Hidden Gem, we had out there last year for 6 months, and it had a 8-inch riser, for example. That's the vertical transport mechanism which is a gating item on how many nodules you can put up the pipe, because our robot crawls along the seafloor, and as we separate the sediment from the nodules in the machine, we then put the nodules into the vertical transport system. So as an example, to get the hidden gem production ready, we put a much bigger riser on there. And so that means that we can simply transport more nodules up the pipe. The other thing we're doing is building a bigger scale collector. And it's amazing. Like when you look at the harvester, the robotic harvester, out of the water, it's heavy. You know, it's almost 100 tons. But in the water, when you add buoyancy to it, and at 4,000 meters below sea level, it leaves a tiny track mark that, you know, we haven't released what the number is, but it's, to the eye, it's kind of like this. So it's amazing that with buoyancy that this machine, this robot, can glide around on the ocean floor. So we're building a slightly bigger production version of that. And so that means that that first production vessel will start off, aiming towards a production target upwards of 3 million tons a year. Now, as we want to scale that, you know, that's one of the beautiful parts of this resource. We convert another ship and we move it on out there. It means that we could add another 3 million tons quite easily. And, you know, that's infrastructure is obviously one of the big gating items with land-based projects. You know, you tend to have to build the infrastructure around the resource. And that might mean roads and rail and deepwater ports and power and places for people to live. But we don't have those challenges. We have other challenges, of course, but we don't have those ones. And I think when people understand how free of infrastructure, restrictions that we are, it really will allow us to add scale to this business. And that's going to be an exciting thing when it comes to the economics.
Let's switch to a regulatory and then talk about the International Seabed Authority. What is it, Gerard, and how does it impact the metals company, and what are you waiting for there in Jamaica?
Well, the International Seabed Authority is the UN-affiliated body made up of 167 member countries plus the European Union, who have the job of regulating the seabed in international waters. And as many of us know, back in the 1970s, they started to collect these very same nodules, but the United Nations stopped them because 50 years ago, the world had not agreed who owned the oceans. That was finally settled when UNCLOS was agreed. And basically, a sovereign owns everything within 12 miles of their coastline. They have an economic right to everything within 200 miles. But beyond that, it's owned by everyone. It will be governed by the International Seabed Authority. So they were chartered as per the convention, a legally binding document that all of the signatories signed on to put in place exploration and exploitation regulations while protecting the marine environment. And those exploitation regulations are in the final phases, and we expect them to be in place very, very soon. It's what has got a lot of people's attention because, of course, while we know we have the resource, we know how to pick them up, we know how to turn them into battery metals, we need to be able to get the permit and the permissions to do so. And we've been at this for 12 years. The ISA have been in existence since 1994. So it's very exciting that this is, the final push to put in place those rules and regulations that will then allow us to lodge our application to move from that exploration phase to an exploitation phase.
Do you have plans, Gerard, on either side of the way that the decision comes out right now? Or what do you expect? There has been some countries that have had, how would you say? I think that some European countries that have come out against or asking for an extended on a moratorium.
Look, all of the people that have asked for a slowdown or a moratorium, and it won't surprise me if more people jump on that bandwagon, is they're saying we don't want to grant mining licenses or permissions to mine until the mining code has been adopted. Because there is this provision called Article 15 that would allow us to submit our mining application today if we wanted to. And that was the 2-year notice that our sponsor nation, Nauru, lodged back on July 9, 2021. And that basically gave the regulator 2 years to finalize the mining code. Otherwise, we would be able to lodge our application. Now, what we have said, as have our sponsor country, Nauru, is we would much rather that mining code be in place before we lodged our application. And so I don't see it as a case of the ISA deciding whether they're going to come down one side or the other. It's already been decided. It's now about the detail. It's now about that final piece of the mining code. And of course, we have been very active participants. If anyone's interested, you can go to the ISA website and see all the iterations. The fourth edition of the mining code was published in March 2019. There are 12 intersessional working groups working very hard. So it's making good progress. And so I see it as an inevitability. And at the moment, we're just working out the final details.
Gerard, what's some of the latest data in the space?
Well, the data is really exciting. And, let me talk about the sediment plume. So people have speculated that, the robot as it crawls along the seafloor will generate a dust cloud that will travel for hundreds or thousands of miles. But the data says that is not the case. The sediment only rises about 2 meters above the seafloor, and 98% of it settles in the test area. So that's really good news. And that's consistent with other contractor data, including MIT, who published 3 peer-reviewed papers last year on the topic. Also, we've generated 200 terabytes of data that has now been made available to the international science community. We uploaded to the OBIS database 2 weeks ago. In fact, the International Seabed Authority uploaded our data. And that increased the available data on the CCZ by 150% compared to all the other contractor efforts for the previous 15 years. So our very heavy investment in science is really starting to be available and there for everyone to see. And of course, what that does is it allows us to build a picture on what the known impacts will be, and then we can model that out to what the potential impacts will be as we move into scale. But the one thing for sure is that we know those impacts are going to be a fraction compared to land-based alternatives, particularly when it comes to rainforest nickel, which of course, half of the economics on this project come from the nickel. And so that's an exciting thing. Obviously, there's no impact on human settlements either. We don't generate waste or tailings. We only use a fraction of the amount of fresh water. So, there are a lot of really positive things that are starting to come to light through our project.
Now, Gerard, there's, since we talked last, there's been a real critical metals push by the governments. Think about Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and other legislation. Has your metals company been able to benefit through loans or regulatory help?
Well, we were pleased to see the Senate add some language into the NDAA, which was announced a week or so ago, which means that they're asking the department to look seriously at how America could benefit from the development of polymetallic nodules out in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. So that's good. Obviously, the IRA incentives are positive for us because, we could be bringing these metals to North America or to free trade partners and getting some of those benefits. And we are talking to all of the loan programs, and so far we're not getting rejected. So, but no news to share on that at the moment.
Lastly, milestones over the next 12 months, Gerard.
Well, at the moment, we are preparing for production. We're also, we have a team of people working very hard on standards and guidelines, on the final mining code. We're working with our onshore processing partners. We're talking to strategic partners about getting involved to help us when it comes to expansion capital. I told the market recently that we were talking to people about, earning into the first production area, NORI, and those talks continue in a positive manner. So we're just progressing all parts of the project in an environment, a macro environment that seems to be very sympathetic with a fresh supply of metals that can secure metal independence for the West as the geopolitics really, step it up a new notch.
Gerard, thanks for speaking with Kitco.
Thank you.
My name is Michael McRae, and you're watching Kitco Mining.